The first lie I told myself was that I was happy. The second was that I was safe. It took a single, silent text message during my in-laws' 20th anniversary dinner to shatter both of those illusions forever. The ballroom was bathed in a golden glow, the clinking of champagne glasses a soundtrack to their perfect fake lives. My husband, Mark, smiled at me from across the table, a practiced, hollow smile that now felt like a stranger's. His mother, an elegant viper in a silk dress, was giving a speech about the sanctity of family and the importance of loyalty. And I, Sarah, the stay-at-home mom they all saw as a lovely, simple piece of furniture, was sitting there, swallowing it all. My phone, tucked discreetly under my napkin, buzzed. I glanced down. An unknown number. The message was short, brutal, and it hit me like a physical blow. Don't react. They're recording you. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I looked up, scanning the room. My mother-in-law's smile was too wide. Her eyes flickered toward my husband for a split second. My husband, meanwhile, was pretending to be engrossed in his phone. The air was thick with a tension only I could feel. I wasn't just at a dinner. I was on a stage, a pawn in a game I didn't know I was playing. They were filming me. But for what? A moment of weakness? A word out of place? Whatever their plan was, it was far more insidious than I could have imagined. And the person who sent me that text, a silent guardian, or just another player in their cruel game, I had to find out. And I knew in that gut-wrenching moment that I would not just survive this. I would win. My name is Sarah, and for 11 years I was what they call a stay-at-home mom. To me, it was the best job in the world. To them, it was my greatest weakness. They saw a woman with no career, no income, no power. They saw a blank canvas on which they could paint any narrative they pleased. I saw a life built on purpose, raising a brilliant son, running a peaceful, organized home, and being the silent anchor for my husband's high-pressure career. My life was a meticulously crafted symphony, and I was proud of every single note. Mark and I met in college. He was ambitious, a charismatic business student with big dreams. I was a quiet art history major, finding beauty in the details others overlooked. Our love story felt like a classic romance. He was the confident star, and I was his steadfast support. After we married, I made the conscious decision to put my career on hold. We agreed that one of us should be home to raise our son, Leo, and since Mark's career in real estate development was taking off, it made the most sense for me to step back. I didn't see it as a sacrifice. I saw it as a choice for a stable, loving family. But over the years, that choice became a weapon in the hands of my mother-in-law, a woman named Eleanor. She was the matriarch of the family, a socialite with a perfectly coiffed blonde bob and a sharp tongue hidden behind a facade of Southern charm. Her first jab came during Leo's first birthday. "It's so wonderful that you can be home with him, Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "It's a shame all that education is going to waste, though. My friend's daughter is a corporate lawyer. Now that's a mother to look up to." My husband, Mark, laughed it off. "Mom, don't be ridiculous. Sarah is an amazing mom." But he said it with a nervous energy, like he was trying to appease both of us. It was the first of many times his silence would speak louder than his words. The passive aggression became a constant in my life. Every family dinner was a battlefield. "Oh, Sarah, you're so lucky you don't have to worry about a paycheck. Must be nice to have so much free time. Eleanor would say, as I sat there, exhausted from a day of running errands, volunteering at school, and taking care of a sick child. Mark would sit silently, engrossed in his phone, or make a weak joke to deflect the tension. He never defended me. Never. That silence was the foundation of their power. It told me, and everyone else, that his mother's cruelty was acceptable, even a little bit true. My husband's love seemed to fade into a transactional arrangement. I was the wife who managed the house, the mother who raised his son, and the hostess who made their family gatherings run smoothly. But I was not a partner. The affection was replaced by a kind of distant politeness. He stopped asking about my day. He forgot our anniversary. He was always on his phone, always working. I tried to tell myself it was the stress of his job, but deep down, a cold fear was starting to grow. The first major red flag was the night he told me we needed to put the house in his name. For tax purposes, honey, he said casually, as if it were a simple accounting decision. With my new development projects, it just makes sense to keep everything under one umbrella. I was naive enough to believe him. I trusted him. We were a team, weren't we? So I signed the papers, feeling a pang of unease but pushing it aside. You can trust me, Sarah. We're in this together. His words were a soothing balm, a perfect lie that made me ignore the growing pit in my stomach. Eleanor's contempt for me wasn't just about my lack of a career. It was also about where I came from. My family was working class. My father was a carpenter, and my mother was a seamstress. We lived a modest but happy life. To Eleanor's family, old money and high society, I was an outsider. She's a lovely girl, but she's just so simple, I once overheard her whisper to a friend on the phone. The words cut deep, but I kept my composure. I had learned to internalize the pain, to turn it into a quiet strength, but the pressure was starting to build. My biggest fear, the one that kept me up at night, was that they were turning my son, Leo, against me. Eleanor started taking him on special outings without me, whispering things in his ear. Your mommy doesn't understand our world, honey. But you will. Leo, who is only 8, started asking me strange questions. Mommy, why don't you have a job like Daddy? Or, Grandma says we need to be careful with money because you don't earn any. My heart ached. I tried to explain that being a mom was a job, a very important one. But how do you fight a narrative that's being spoon-fed to a child by the people he loves? The morning of the anniversary dinner, the tension was palpable. Eleanor called me to remind me to look my best. After all, we're a family, Sarah. We need to present a united front, even if we're not always on the same page. The veiled threat in her voice was unmistakable. Mark was distant, on his phone more than usual. He seemed stressed, but not about the dinner. It was a different kind of stress, the kind a person gets when they're about to do something they know is wrong. I tried to talk to him, but he brushed me off. Don't worry about it, Sarah. Everything is fine. Just smile for the cameras. I was already on edge when we arrived at the venue. A photographer was everywhere, taking pictures and videos of the happy family. I smiled, a forced, brittle smile, but my instincts were screaming. Something was wrong. The air was heavy, like before a storm. I kept telling myself it was just my paranoia, that their cruelty was just a part of their personalities, not part of a larger plan. But my gut instinct, the one that had been screaming for years, told me a different story. And then, during dinner, just as Eleanor was toasting to their beautiful, perfect family, That single, silent text message arrived. Don't react. They're recording you. The words were a key, unlocking a door to a new, terrifying reality. The paranoia I felt wasn't paranoia at all. It was a premonition. My husband's family wasn't just cruel, they were conspirators. And the silent game they were playing with my emotions was about to become something far more dangerous. My mind raced back to every suspicious moment. The time I found a small black device taped under the kitchen counter. Mark said it was a router for a smart home device. The time a security technician came to the house and spent an unusual amount of time in the living room near a power outlet. The time Eleanor accidentally dropped her phone during a heated discussion with me, and I later saw her looking through her call logs, not her pictures. Every single one of those seemingly random events now clicked into place. A perfectly constructed mosaic of betrayal. They had been setting me up for months, maybe even years. I was not a simple stay-at-home mom. I was a target. They wanted to humiliate me, discredit me, maybe even declare me an unfit mother to get custody of my son and keep the family assets. My heart, which had been broken by their cruelty for so long, now felt like it was turning to stone. The fear was still there, but it was being eclipsed by a cold, hard rage. I wasn't going to let them win. I would not be the victim they wanted me to be. I kept a serene smile on my face as I watched Eleanor, her mouth still moving, her eyes still sparkling with malevolent glee. I knew what I had to do. The game had changed. The rules were now clear. I had to find out who sent that text. I had to find the cameras. And most importantly, I had to beat them at their own game. They wanted to record my downfall. I was going to record their ruin. The night of the dinner was a blur of forced smiles and cold dread. As we drove home in silence, the car felt like a cage. Mark was still glued to his phone, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. I sat beside him, my mind racing, replaying every cruel comment, every veiled threat, every strange glance. The text message had become my truth. And their perfect family facade was now a thin, transparent lie. I waited until he fell asleep, his breathing a slow, steady rhythm that I used to find comforting. That night, it was just a countdown. I tiptoed out of the bedroom, my heart pounding in my ears. I knew I couldn't trust my home, but I had to start somewhere. My first thought was the small, black device I had found under the kitchen counter weeks ago. Mark had called it a router, but something about it felt wrong. It was about the size of a thumb drive, with a tiny, blinking red light I had never noticed before. I found it, disconnected it, and slipped it into my pocket. My next stop was Mark's home office. He was notoriously messy, but I knew where he kept his most important things. His desk had a hidden compartment where he stored his work hard drives. I found it, a small, unassuming black box, and with a shaking hand, I plugged it into my laptop. The folder was labeled Family Backup. It was a generic name, designed to look harmless. Inside, I found not just photos and documents, but a treasure trove of video files. The titles were a roadmap of my humiliation: Kitchen, Jan 15, Bedroom, Feb 2, Living Room, Mar 10. My blood ran cold. They had been recording me for months. I opened the first file, my hands trembling. It was a video of me on the phone with my best friend Jane, crying after a particularly brutal family dinner. "I just feel so alone, Jane," I whispered in the video. "I feel like I'm losing my mind." The video was unedited, raw. I closed it and opened another. This one was a video of me arguing with Mark about his long hours. "You're never home anymore. I feel like a single mother." In the original video, I was clearly upset but not hysterical. The next file, labeled Bedroom Edit, was a jarring montage. They had cut and spliced my words, rearranged the clips to make me look unhinged, screaming, and out of control. My quiet cries were amplified, my frustrated words taken out of context. They were building a narrative. They were creating a monster. The final piece of evidence, and the one that truly broke me, was an audio file. It was a conversation between Mark and Eleanor, recorded a few days earlier. The video of her yelling is perfect. Eleanor's voice crackled. Just a few more clips of her forgetting things, and we can present a case to the judge. Say she's unstable. Say she's a risk. We'll have full custody of Leo by the end of the summer. Mark's voice, low and conspiratorial, responded. And the house will be mine, as a single parent, once she's gone. The world, which had been a fragile reality, shattered. I wasn't losing my mind. They were stealing it. They weren't just playing a game. They were planning to take my son. The pain was so profound, it became a kind of clarity. The humiliation I had felt for years, the quiet rage, the self-doubt, all of it turned into steel. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor who had just found her weapon. I copied every file, every video, every edited and unedited clip onto a new external hard drive. I created a secure, cloud-based backup, password protected and encrypted. I wasn't just collecting evidence, I was building my case. The next morning, I did something I had never done before. I left the house without telling anyone where I was going. My first stop was a lawyer's office, a recommendation from a friend of Jane's. Sarah, the stay-at-home mom who had never needed legal advice, was now sitting in a sleek, modern office, a woman named Eleanor across from me, listening with a stone face as I recounted the last 5 years of my life. I showed her the hidden device, the hard drive, and the manipulated videos. She watched in silence, her expression a mix of shock and grim determination. "Sarah," she said, her voice low and serious, "this isn't just emotional abuse. This is a clear case of illegal surveillance, invasion of privacy, and attempted fraud. They've dug their own grave." With her guidance, my plan began to take shape. My first step was a forensic analysis of the video files to prove they had been tampered with. This would be our irrefutable evidence. The next was filing for an emergency protection order to suspend Eleanor's contact with Leo based on the audio file where she admitted to manipulating him. This was the hardest part. The thought of my son being used as a pawn was a knife in my heart, but I knew I had to protect him, no matter the cost. My lawyer also advised me to start recording every conversation with Mark and Eleanor, not secretly, but with a clear legal recording app that would timestamp and document everything. I was no longer an unwitting participant. I was the one pulling the strings. My lawyer told me to stay calm, to pretend nothing had changed, to give them exactly what they wanted, so they would keep digging their own grave. I had to play their game, but on my terms. A few days later, Mark confronted me. "You've been so quiet lately. Are you feeling okay?" he asked, his tone laced with a fake concern I now saw as a fishing expedition. I looked him dead in the eye and gave him a smile as brittle as glass. "I'm just tired, Mark. I've been feeling a little overwhelmed lately." He nodded, a look of triumph in his eyes. He thought I was cracking, that his plan was working. He didn't know I was simply laying a trap. The real game began. I started acting the part they had written for me. I would accidentally forget where I put my keys. I would sigh dramatically when Mark talked about his work. I would act emotional and fragile when Eleanor was around. I was giving them the edited version of Sarah, the one they had created, and they ate it up. Mark would whisper to his phone, "She's getting worse." And Eleanor would say, "Just a little longer." Dear? I felt a cold satisfaction as I watched them play their parts, unaware that their audience was me. But the fear was still a constant companion. One evening, after I had dropped Leo off at a play date, I came home to find a folded note on my kitchen counter. It was a single, typed sentence. "You need to leave. They're going to use the boy against you." My hands trembled. This wasn't from my lawyer. It was another unknown sender. A silent ally or a different kind of threat. Whoever it was, they were inside my house, and they knew their plan. The feeling of being watched returned, but this time it was a warning. I had to act fast. My lawyer confirmed the court had approved the emergency order. Eleanor's contact with Leo was suspended, effective immediately. The news was a quiet victory, a small crack in their armor. The next day, Eleanor showed up at my door, a furious storm of rage and entitlement. "What have you done, you ungrateful brat?" she shrieked, her perfect composure gone. "My grandson! How dare you keep my grandson away from me?" I looked at her, and for the first time I felt no fear, only pity. "Eleanor," I said, my voice calm and steady, "I'm just doing what's best for my son." She screamed obscenities and left. I knew her desperation was a sign of their plan falling apart, but what came next was a final, chilling blow. The following morning, my car was covered in white spray paint. "Crazy bitch," "Bad mom," and other slurs were scrawled across the doors. Leo saw it first, his face pale with confusion. "Mommy, what does that mean?" he asked, his small voice cracking with fear. My heart broke. I hugged him tight and said, "Someone very sad did this, honey, but it's okay. We're going to fix it." I called the police and filed a report, knowing in my heart that it was Eleanor. But this time, I was ready. I had installed a small camera in the flower pot by the garage, a preemptive move I had made a week earlier. The footage clearly showed Eleanor, in a dark coat, doing the deed. My lawyer's smile was grim. "Now we have it all," she said. "The case for a restraining order is rock solid." The restraining order was a second victory, a small triumph in a war I knew was far from over. But it was also a sign. They were losing control, and their desperation was making them sloppy. The game was in my hands now. The final step of my plan was to go public. I had to expose them, not just in a courtroom, but in front of everyone they held dear. And I knew the perfect place. The 20th anniversary dinner of Eleanor and her husband was just 2 weeks away. It was a gala event, a celebration of their perfect family. It would be the stage for their final public humiliation. I sent my lawyer all the evidence, every file, every video, every restraining order, and police report. I also hired a tech specialist to prepare a presentation, a side-by-side comparison of their edited videos and my original files, audio of their cruel remarks, and most importantly, the evidence of their plan to take my son. As the day of the dinner approached, I was strangely at peace. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, quiet resolve. I was no longer just Sarah, the stay-at-home mom. I was the architect of their downfall, and I knew, with every fiber of my being, that they were about to witness the true strength of a woman they thought had none. I was ready to walk into that ballroom, not as a victim, but as the one who would finally turn on the lights in their darkness. The anniversary dinner was a symphony of opulence and hypocrisy. The grand ballroom was filled with Eleanor's friends and Mark's business associates, a veritable who's who of their perfect little world. Everyone was dressed in expensive clothes, their smiles as polished as the silverware. I was there too, in a simple but elegant black dress, my face a calm mask. No one would ever have guessed the storm brewing behind my eyes. The evening progressed through a series of predictable speeches. Mark's father, a quiet man who always seemed to follow Eleanor's lead, spoke first, his words a tribute to his wife's strength and grace. The guests clapped politely. Then Mark stood up, a glass of champagne in hand. He smiled at me, a practiced, empty gesture, before turning to his mother. "My mother," he began, his voice amplified by the microphone, "is the heart of this family. She has always been the one to hold us together, even when faced with challenges." My stomach tightened. I knew what was coming. He was setting the stage for the first strike. "And in that spirit," he continued, turning his gaze back to me, "I want to thank my wife, Sarah, for being so brave during this difficult time in her life. It's hard to watch someone you love struggle, to see them lose their way, but we are here for her, as a family. We will get her the help she needs." The words hung in the air, a poisonous, condescending performance. My blood ran cold. They were not just insulting me. They were publicly framing me as mentally unstable, making a case for themselves right then and there. A few of the guests glanced at me with expressions of pity or vague concern. Eleanor nodded gravely, as if confirming her son's tragic truth. The lie, so carefully constructed, was about to become their reality. For a moment, a flicker of panic tried to take hold. But I pushed it down. I had come too far to let their cheap shots throw me off. I stood up slowly, a glass of water in my hand. The clinking of my spoon against the glass was the only sound in the sudden silence. I walked calmly to the stage. Mark's eyes widened, a flash of surprise and then a thin, warning line across his lips. Eleanor's face hardened. She knew I was breaking script. I took the microphone from him. "Thank you, Mark," I said, my voice steady and clear. "That was a very touching speech. And you're right. It is hard to watch a family lose their way, but I'm not here to talk about my struggles. I'm here to show you what a true, loving family really looks like." Before anyone could react, I turned to the technician I had hired. He gave me a quick, confident nod. The projector screen behind me, which had been displaying a slideshow of family photos, went black. A hush fell over the room. I felt Mark's hand on my arm, his grip tight. "Sarah, what are you doing?" he hissed, his voice full of barely contained fury. I simply looked at him, a small, sad smile on my face. "I'm telling the truth, Mark. Something you seem to have forgotten how to do." The first image to appear on the screen was a side-by-side video. On one side, it was their edited clip of me crying on the phone with my best friend. The audio was distorted, my words taken out of context to make it seem like a hysterical breakdown. On the other side was the original, unedited footage from the hidden camera. My voice was calm, my words a quiet confession of my loneliness and frustration. The contrast was stark. The crowd stirred, a wave of murmurs rippling through the room. The next clip was even more damning. It was the audio recording from the hard drive. Eleanor's voice, clear as day, discussing her plan. Just a few more clips of her forgetting things, and we can present a case to the judge. Say she's unstable. Then Mark's voice, low and cold. And the house will be mine, as a single parent, once she's gone. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the sound of a carefully constructed world collapsing. Eleanor's face, moments ago so smug, was now a mask of pure horror. Her husband just stared, his mouth agape. Mark lunged for the microphone, but I stepped back, and the hired security stepped in, blocking him from the stage. "The funny thing about the truth," I said, looking out at the shocked faces in the crowd, "is that it always finds a way to come out. For years, I believed I was the problem, that I was weak. But the truth is, I was a victim of a crime planned by the very people who just stood on this stage, celebrating their family values." My voice didn't tremble. There were no tears, just a cold, hard resolve. I played one more clip. It was the video from the camera in the flower pot, showing Eleanor, her face a mask of rage, defacing my car with spray paint. The room gasped. "And this," I said, "is what their love really looks like. Not compassion, not support. Just a web of lies and manipulation designed to steal a mother's son and a woman's home." I looked directly at Mark, at the man I once loved. His face was a mixture of fear and fury. "You wanted me to be crazy, Mark? You wanted me to break? Well, I'm still standing. And now, everyone knows exactly who the real monster is." I put the microphone back on the stand, leaving the screen to display the damning evidence for all to see. I didn't wait for an apology. I didn't wait for a reaction. I had said everything I needed to say. I walked off the stage, past the shocked faces, past the whispers and gasps. My revenge wasn't loud. It was an echoing silence of a truth they could never bury. I had just won my life back. The aftermath of my speech was a silent firestorm. As I left the ballroom, the whispers turned into a low hum, then a cacophony of questions and accusations. No one followed me. They were all too busy watching their perfect world crumble. I didn't get in my car right away. I stood outside the venue taking a deep breath of the cold night air. The relief was a physical ache in my chest, a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for years finally lifting. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was my lawyer, a woman named Emily. "Sarah, you've done it," she said, her voice full of a quiet triumph. "They've received the court documents. The police are on their way to serve the restraining order and seize the original surveillance equipment. The game is over." I drove home with a new sense of purpose. My house, which had felt like a cage for so long, now felt like a fortress I had just reclaimed. The first thing I did was take a long, hot shower, washing away not just the makeup and the fancy dress, but the years of humiliation and self-doubt. I felt reborn. But the fight wasn't completely over. My phone started to ring, a relentless series of calls from an unknown number. Mark. I ignored every single one. I knew that the moment I answered, he would start with the lies, the apologies, the false promises. I was done with his games. The next morning, I woke up to a new reality. My doorbell rang, and it was a police officer. He served me with a notice. Mark was legally restricted from coming within 1,000 feet of me or our son, and he had been served with divorce papers. He had also been suspended from his job, pending an investigation into his business practices, as his assets were now being scrutinized. The company he had so proudly built was starting to fall apart. And just like that, the man who had tried to erase me from our home was now legally barred from it. My victory wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. Eleanor, however, was far from defeated. She started a social media campaign, posting old pictures of our family with captions about a good woman gone wrong and the heartache of a family torn apart by lies and greed. She tried to paint me as a gold digger, a crazy woman who had a breakdown and was now trying to steal her son's inheritance. The comments came flooding in. Anonymous attacks, hateful messages, people calling me a monster. For a brief, horrible moment, the old Sarah, the one who crumbled under pressure, almost resurfaced. But then I remembered the video from the dinner, the one that had exposed their hypocrisy. I knew what I had to do. I went online, but not to fight. I created an anonymous account and started sharing the evidence one by one. The original videos, the court documents, the restraining order against Eleanor. I wrote short, factual captions, with no emotion, just dates and actions. March 12th. Hidden camera footage reveals verbal abuse and manipulation. April 5th. Court order filed against Eleanor for emotional harm to a minor. The truth, unvarnished and raw, spread like wildfire. A local news station picked up the story, then a national one. My story wasn't just my story anymore. It was an example of psychological abuse, of what a woman can endure and overcome. The support I received was overwhelming. Messages from other women who had gone through similar situations, from lawyers offering free advice, from mothers just like me, all cheering me on. But one message stood out. It was from a woman named Chloe. "My ex-husband tried to do the same thing to me years ago," she wrote. "He worked at a firm with a partner named Richard Thorne. He helped him set it all up. Your husband's company. You should look into it." The message sent a shiver down my spine. I knew that name. Richard Thorne was Mark's mentor, a powerful partner at his firm. He wasn't just a bystander, he was a silent accomplice. I took the information to my lawyer, Emily. She was a pit bull, and she immediately began digging. We found old court records, a dismissed case of a custody dispute involving Chloe, and a man matching Mark's description. The pattern was identical: illegal surveillance, psychological manipulation, and a quick dismissal with no explanation. It was all there. We arranged a meeting with Chloe. She was a kind but broken woman, still haunted by her past. She gave me all her old documents, emails, and even an audio recording of a conversation between her ex and Richard Thorne, discussing how to deal with a difficult wife. It was clear. This wasn't just a family affair. It was a network, a system designed to exploit and silence women. My revenge was no longer a personal battle. It was a crusade. With all the new evidence, my lawyer filed a formal complaint with the State Bar Association against Richard Thorne, citing his involvement in multiple cases of judicial fraud and legal manipulation. It was a massive blow. The man who had been the architect of so many women's downfalls was finally being held accountable. At the same time, we filed a new motion in my case, adding charges of conspiracy and illegal activity. Mark was now facing not just a divorce, but a criminal investigation. But even with my legal victories, the threats continued. A few days later, a mysterious package was delivered to my house. Inside was a printed, signed sales contract for my house, dated just 3 days prior. The buyer's name was Victoria Stone. The signature was Mark's. He had sold our home behind my back to a woman I had never heard of before the court had even made its final decision. It was a final, desperate act of spite. But it was also a sign. He was cornered, lashing out like a wounded animal. I took the contract to my lawyer, who simply smiled. He's just given us a clear case of fraudulent transfer of property. This just sealed his fate. The final blow came in an email from the State Bar Association. Richard Thorne had been temporarily suspended, and an official investigation had begun. The news spread like wildfire, causing a massive scandal at Mark's firm. The partners, fearing a lawsuit, fired Mark immediately. He lost his job, his reputation, and the financial security he had built his entire life on. I watched the news report, not with glee, but with a quiet sense of finality. It was over. The man who had tried to take everything from me now had nothing left, but even in victory, a shadow lingered. One night, I found a small handwritten note on my bedside table. It was a single sentence. You won, but you know this isn't over. The handwriting was not Mark's. It was elegant, cursive, and eerily familiar. I scanned the room, my heart pounding. How had they gotten inside? My home, my fortress, had been breached again. The relief I had felt was replaced by a cold, numbing fear. I had won the war, but a ghost still remained. I immediately called the police. They took the note as evidence, but without a clear suspect, there was little they could do. I spent the next few nights sleeping with a knife under my pillow, the lights on, every creak and groan of the house sending a jolt of panic through me. I was no longer afraid of Mark or Eleanor. I was afraid of the unknown, of a ghost I had yet to face. But even this fear, this new kind of torture, would not defeat me. I refused to let them turn my victory into a living hell. I installed a top-of-the-line security system, cameras, alarms, and a direct line to the police. I would not be a victim again. I would not let them win. I would fight for my peace, for my son's safety, and for the right to live a life free from their shadows. The final note, the ghost in my home, became the last piece of a twisted puzzle. The elegant cursive belonged to a woman named Victoria Stone, the same name on the fraudulent sales contract. My lawyer's investigation revealed she was not a stranger, but an old acquaintance of Mark's, a woman who had been a part of his life long before me. She was a silent player, a ghost from his past who was now actively working to haunt my future. It all clicked into place. The anonymous tips, the trespassing, the constant surveillance. All of it had been orchestrated by a woman who felt entitled to the life I had built. With this final piece of evidence, my lawyer filed a motion for stalking, criminal trespassing, and violation of a court order against Victoria Stone. The police, now with a clear suspect and a trail of digital evidence, moved quickly. They found her in a small rental apartment, a space filled with more surveillance equipment, photos of me and my son, and detailed notes of my daily routine. It was a sick obsession, and it proved that their game of psychological torture was far from over. Victoria was arrested. Mark and Eleanor were indicted as accomplices. The trio of conspirators, who had so cruelly tried to erase me, were finally facing the full weight of the law. The news coverage was massive. What started as a secret recording at a family dinner turned into a national story about abuse, manipulation, and the power of one woman's fight for justice. I saw their faces on the news, not as the pillars of society they pretended to be, but as criminals. And me? I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor. With the legal battles finally settled, I was free to rebuild my life. I sold the house, the one that had felt like a fortress but was a symbol of my past trauma. I didn't want to live in the home where I had been spied on, lied to, and gaslighted. I wanted a fresh start, a clean slate. My son and I moved to a small, quiet town an hour away, a place with old oak trees, a friendly community, and neighbors who knew our names, not our story. I found a small, charming cottage with a garden. The kitchen was bright and cheerful, and the living room had a huge window that let in the sunlight. I bought a small desk and started a new business as a virtual assistant, using my organizational skills and attention to detail for clients all over the country. My income was modest, but it was my own. It was a validation of my worth, not as someone's wife, but as a capable, independent woman. My son, Leo, finally started to heal. We talked about what happened, not with anger or bitterness, but with honesty. I explained that some people make bad choices and that it had nothing to do with him or his worth. He now laughs freely, sleeps soundly, and has a new best friend down the street. He's just a child again, and that is my greatest victory. I didn't get him back by fighting. I got him back by winning. I have not heard from Mark or Eleanor. The restraining orders are still in effect, and the charges against them are ongoing. I've received a few anonymous messages on social media, some supportive, some hateful. But I've learned to block the noise and focus on the life I've built. The fear of being watched is still there, a ghost in the back of my mind, but it no longer paralyzes me. I have cameras, alarms, and, most importantly, the knowledge that I am strong enough to face whatever comes next. Looking back, I realize that the woman who sat at that dinner table was not weak. She was just quiet. She was a woman who trusted, who loved, and who believed in the promises of a family. But that woman is gone. The woman who stands here today is forged in fire. She knows her worth. She knows her strength. She knows that silence is a choice, not a weakness, and that the greatest revenge is not to destroy your enemies, but to build a life so beautiful and authentic that they can never touch it. My journey taught me that true strength isn't about how loud you can scream, but how quiet you can be while you build your defenses. It's not about fighting back with fists, but with facts. It's about knowing that you are worth protecting and that your peace is a precious thing you must fight for with every ounce of your being. They tried to break me, but all they did was make me unbreakable. I think my favorite moment was in that courtroom, seeing their faces as the judge approved the final order. The silence was louder than any screaming, and it felt like a hug. What about you? What part of this story resonated with you the most? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story inspired you, please don't forget to like and subscribe to support me in sharing more stories of quiet strength and powerful comebacks. Thank you.